Alright, what's up everybody? Mr. Porkchop back here with another video. This video is basically going to be on the next two chapters, which are working with lists, which is chapter 4, and then chapter 5 is going to be, I think, just more if statements. So if statements, again, is going to have lists involved. So yeah, if you guys are interested in learning Python and learning about lists, or arrays is what they're usually called in the other programming languages, then stay tuned and see what we're doing. So the first thing is I have the Sublime Text editor here. This is what I'm going to be using. If you guys want to download this, it's pretty easy to download, and once you open it up, it's going to look exactly like what I got here. It's pretty simple. We're just going to create a new file, and then we're going to save that file. And I'm just going to save it inside this Python projects folder that I have. We're just going to call it list or lists. Oops. Forgot to, whoa. It's going to be list.py. Alright, so we got that. Now, we're just going to create our first list. So our first list here, I'm not going to follow exactly out of the book as far as all the different variables and names that they have. I'm just going to kind of create names that make sense for me. So we're going to make a list called people, and then we're just going to set it equal to a few different people. Call this one Peter, and then this one will be Paul, and then the last one just be maybe like Jerry. All right, so that is our list. If we print our list, you can see that it prints out the whole list: Peter, Paul, Jerry, with the brackets and everything, and basically also the apostrophes and everything, which isn't exactly what we would like it to print. So if we wanted to print just the names and not all that other stuff, then what we could do is we can go print, and then instead of doing people, whoops, all right. So we wanted to print all that, but without all that additional stuff, then we can do is use a for loop. So you just write for, and then we'll say for person in people, and then you're going to do a colon, and then when you hit enter, or when I hit enter, you'll see that it indents for me. When in Python, the way that it basically tells what's inside your for loop and how long your for loop is going to go is anything indented underneath the for loop or anything tabbed in is going to be inside the for loop. And the second that something is not indented, it's going to stop the for loop. So underneath this for loop, we're going to type print, and then we'll just do person. And then we can go ahead and build that. And you'll see that the first printed our list, Peter, Paul, Jerry, with all the additional stuff. And then below that, it prints Peter, Paul, and Jerry by itself. And the reason that it does this is because of our for loop. So let me just put a space here. So what these two lines of code are essentially doing is they're creating a variable called person, and then it's looping through our list people. It's going to take one person's name out of that list and assign it to this variable person. And then right after that, it's going to print it. And then it goes again, it takes the next name, it associates it with person, it prints that name. And it keeps going and it loops through the list. Now lists or arrays are indexed starting with 0. Yeah, because lists index starting at 0, it gets a little confusing if you're trying to access a particular index on the list or a particular name, let's say we wanted Peter, instead of doing 1, which would kind of come naturally because it's the first name in the list, you would have to put 0. And then if you build it, you can see at the very bottom here, it prints out Peter. However, if we put 1, because we're thinking, oh, Peter's the first name in the list, and we build that, you're going to see that it actually prints Paul, because these are index 0, 1, and 2. And in Python, something that's really cool that does not work in C++ or Java, believe me, I tried it right before this video, is you can also put -1, and -1 is going to give you the very last name in the list, or the last item in the list if you're not using names. The thing that is cool about this is sometimes you're not going to know the length of your list, but you still want to grab the last thing on the index, or the last index on the list. And you can just do that by doing -1, and regardless of the size of the list, it'll give you the last item on the list, which is really cool. And just like we've done before, if you wanted to, you can get kind of creative with these print statements by concatenating other things together with them. So for instance, if you wanted to do some type of like little message, you could do like person, and then if you do this F here, so what you can do is you can do F, which will concatenate all the strings together, and then the first string is going to be our person's name, and then it can say is a person, and then we could print this, and it'll add that string to the end. So you have your little comma, is a person, is a person, is a person, and it'll loop through and print that every time. So something kind of cool to think about. Also, because this variable person that we are assigning temporarily to our string, you can use all the same methods that we used in my previous video on strings. So if you wanted to change the case of the person's name, for instance, to like all uppercase, you can still do that. And you can see they're all uppercase. Same thing for lower, or if you have a list of names that people have entered and you're not sure if they've capitalized them, you can always just do title case, and then that'll put the first letter of each name capital for you. Now, as I've already covered here, the for loops will continue to go, and they will do anything that is indented. Python basically keeps track of things just by indents or tabs, which is it's pretty clean. It looks nice. Other languages, if you did a for loop, normally a for loop in like C++ or Java would look more like this, where you have for, you put your expression inside of your parentheses there, and then you use brackets, and then everything everything inside of here would be in the loop, and then you do a colon there. So you can see like this is something that you would see more in like C++ or Java, similar. And in Python, it's just much cleaner. You just have the colon, and then anything indented or anything with a tab is going to be inside your for loop. That being said, Python, because it's looking for those white spaces or those tabs, it's easy to kind of make a mistake. If something is tabbed that's not supposed to be, like for instance, if I just tab that in and then I try to build it, it'll let you know like an unexpected indent. So this isn't supposed to be indented. It's not a for loop. So it's going to give you an error. So it will keep track of that for you, and you might see errors like that. There are other things I think that are going to be indented, at least that's what the book hints later on. So for now, it just says to make sure that anything inside your for loops is indented, and then anything that you don't want in your for loop is not indented. It also it talks about maybe if you forgot the colon, if you do that, it's going to give you another error, and it's just going to say invalid syntax. And then those are kind of hard to find sometimes, just missing one thing. So get used to these errors and what they start to learn what they mean so that you can try to debug your code and find the problems. Um, but it usually will give you kind of a hint of where it found the issue and what the issue was caused by. All right, so we're going to make some numeric lists here, and there's a function called range, which allows you to basically set a list equal to a bunch of numbers within a certain range. So I'm going to get rid of this for now. We create 4, we'll just do value, and then we can do inside the range of 1 through 5, and don't forget our colon, and then we'll just print value. Now a lot of you guys might be thinking if I hit print or if I hit build, it should print 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and as you can see, it only prints 1, 2, 3, 4, and that is because this range method, it'll go through and it'll increment until it gets to the last number you tell it. So this 5, that's when we said to stop. So it doesn't include the 5. If we wanted 1 through 5, we would have to do 1 and 6, and then it'll give us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So just as our lists start with 0, our ranges end one number before what you give it. So if we wanted to create a list using this range method, we could do that. We can basically just create a variable. We can call it numbers. Another thing the book mentions is to try to give your lists plural names. So when you name your lists, make sure that they're plural. So instead of doing number, just do numbers. Okay, I guess that just kind of helps. So then you can do list, parentheses, which is going to be a little different than what we did up there with the brackets, but for this we'll do list, and then we can do the range function again, or the range method inside of there. Oh, actually it is a function, sorry. Yeah, so the list function and the range function here we are going to use, and again we'll do our same range of 1 through 5, and then if we want we can go ahead and print numbers. And as you can see, we have two different lists here. One we initialized as Peter, Paul, and Jerry up here, which is a list of strings. And then the second one, we actually used the list function combined with the range function to create a list of numbers or integers, and we were able to print both those lists. All right, so along with our list and range functions, the range function here can actually take a third parameter. It's not necessary, but you can. And this third piece of information that you give it is going to be used as basically an incrementation. So if you wanted like all the even numbers or all the odd numbers, then you can give it a third parameter. In this case, we'll call it 2, and it'll give you all the values within your range from 1 to 11. So 11 again not being included. So it'll give us everything from 1 to 10 in spaces of 2. So if we go ahead and run this, you will see that it gave us all the odd ones because we started with 1. So it gave us 1, and then it incremented by 2, gave us 3, incremented us by 2, and gave us 5, and so on. And if we wanted all the even ones, we just have to change our starting point, and then we could get all the even ones. And because these are all numbers, you can do a lot of cool things inside of for loops with these lists. So we can do a for loop. So I'm just going to follow this example here, and we're going to create another list called squares. And this list we are going to initialize to basically a blank list. So there's nothing inside this list right now. That's what those two empty brackets mean. But it is a list nonetheless. And we're going to do 4 values in range 1 through 11 again. So this will give us the numbers 1 through 10. And then we're going to create a square value here, and that's going to be equal to value raised to the second power. So 2 asterisks is what's used to indicate a value being raised to the second power. So in this case, we're squaring the value. And again, remember that our value is going to be changing throughout this for loop. It starts out with 1, and then 2, and then 3, and goes through our whole list. And then we can create, okay, yeah, so then how we add to an empty list. So we have our squares up there, right? Squares is an empty list. To add things to it, we're going to use another method called amend. And then we are going to add our squared variable. So for each loop, it's going to go through our loop. It's going to take this value and square it and then add it to our empty list. Now when our loop is done, we are going to print our list. So there we have it. Again, remember everything inside the for loop is going to be indented. So these 2 lines are going to loop through our list. And each time it loops, it's going to add a squared value to our squared list. And then when it's done looping, it'll print that list. I forgot my colon. All right, and there we go. We have our range 1 through 10 squared. So it's squared 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up to 10. And those are the numbers that we have. And because our lists are all numbers, we can use some pretty cool methods or functions with those. So if we wanted, we could do like max and then go squares. And that would, actually, let me just go print first. We'll put that all in a print so it'll just tell us. So if we run that, it'll give us the max number, so the highest value number in our list. And as you can see, we printed the list out before. You know that 100 is the highest. Along with the highest, you could go min, and it'll give you the lowest number. You can even do the sum of the numbers, which would add them up. And you get all these numbers added together, which is 385. Right. So obviously I have a different shirt on another day. I only get usually around like an hour or so a day if I'm lucky while my daughter's napping to record these videos. So this one, if you're probably going to see me go through a couple different shirts throughout this because I'm going to record this over multiple days and then I'll splice it all together. But yeah, from where we left off, we have our yeah. So just give me a second here to get my mind back into where we were. We created our empty list of squares, and then we did our for loop to go through and basically square these values in the range of 1 through 11 and add that to our table. Now there's another way that we could have done this. Let me just take the book right here and I want to read through the section again just to make sure I am explaining it correctly. So the book basically is saying that this next thing I'm going to show you here is called a list comprehension. So instead of just having our empty list, we could initialize this list all in one line and get the same values. So we'll call this squares. I'm just going to add a 2 to the end. It's kind of clunky, but yeah, for now, bear with me. And then from there, we can do brackets. And inside of our brackets, we can just go similar to kind of what we did below in our for loop. We'll just do values squared and then do our for value in range of 1 through 11. All right. We will, all right, actually we're already printing squares up there, so I'm just going to print squares 2 down here, and we should see the exact same list So ignore the first two, but these two lines here, you can see are identical lists. So all of this code right here that we wrote can be done in this one line here using these list comprehensions. So again, it's just basically condensing everything to fit inside of your brackets instead of having it all outside and just initializing your list to an empty list and then doing the for loop, adding everything. You can do it all in here. You can see here is a little different, just in the order of it all. So your for value in range, this line is pretty much identical as your for loop up here, but instead of having the square equal, creating a variable here, and again, this isn't actually even necessary right here. If we didn't want to create a temporary variable to hold our value squared, we could have just wrote value squared right inside of here, and it would have taken our value and it would have squared it and amended it to our list right there. So this isn't really necessary. It's just something that I'm used to doing and something that kind of makes your code a little cleaner, or not cleaner, but makes your code a little bit more readable and understandable. But again, isn't really necessary. So you don't always have to create separate temporary variables in order to do that. So this value here that we're trying to do, or this value that we want to amend to our list, it basically goes in the beginning here. So it'll be, and we could, even if we wanted just the value in range, instead of squaring it, we could get rid of the square. And then it's basically just going to put all those values in that range into our list. So if we build that, you'll see that it just goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way through 10. So the way you should think of these list comprehensions is kind of, if you're using a for loop in order to get values, then the value that you are going, that value in your for loop that is going to be holding all your values, that's what you want in front of this. So you're going to put this first and then do all the other stuff. All right, so the other thing, the next thing here that we're going to go through is basically taking, kind of slicing a list. So there is a way, if you want to print or show just part of a list, you can do that. Let me just clean some of this up a little bit. I'll keep our first list that we had here. Actually, let me keep the second list because it's a little smaller and neater. And I'll just take that 2 out now that I don't have duplicate variables. This numbers list, maybe we'll just leave that for now. All right, that's a little bit better. All right, so we have a few lists to play with. So let me look over here. All right, so if we wanted to go ahead and print out, let's say, part of our squares list, we have squares here, and basically instead of just giving an index, like we could give it 0, we could give it 1. If we wanted just that index, we're going to give it 2 different indexes. We're going to basically give it where we want it to start and then where we want it to end, and you separate those 2 values by colon. So let's say we wanted to start at the third number here in our list, which is actually going to be index 2, and then we could do a colon, and let's say we wanted to stop at 36, which is going to be our 6th, so that would be our 5th one. So if we go ahead and print that, you'll see that it prints basically 3, 4, and 5. And that's because it's no longer squared over here. I was like, why did that look so strange? Let me square this again, and then it'll make a little more sense. So that's what we wanted, 9, 16, and 25. Again, it looks like this is ending a little bit shy of it. So I was again under the assumption that it was going to print out, I think, 36, but it didn't because it stopped at the 5th index. So if I wanted to include that 36, then I would just have to add one more. So keep in mind that this index that it's ending at will not actually be included in the list. With these sliced lists, you can also slice a list and loop through a sliced list. It's like a tongue twister trying to say all this stuff. So let's go ahead and I'll show you similar examples to what they have here in the book. We'll just do for, yeah, I guess we'll just do value again. For value in squares, because that's our list. That'll be our loop. Make sure to, and we will do our same splice that we did before. So that's our list. That's the spliced list that we wanted to loop through. Just make sure to put a colon after that so it starts your loop. And because this is a number, I don't really think there are many methods with it. So the example here has us go through a list of players, and obviously those are strings, and then they have them basically just printing out the player's name in title case, which gives it the capital. Because my list is just numbers, and it's not going to do that. But what it'll do, if you do it this way, you can loop through this splice list and then you can print out just the value that are in those indexes. And again, that gets rid of your brackets and your commas here so that you can use, each one. So that's a way to loop through a list that you have shortened, or a chunk of a list that you've taken out. All right, so the next thing it's talking about, and the reason I guess they probably did it in this order, is that the book teaches us about slicing a list, and now when it comes to copying a list, we are going to use the slice to make sure that we actually have a copy of a list and not the same exact list. So they go through a couple different examples of that. What I'm going to do is just use my squares list that I have here. So we can do squares, and then they basically just have it set to we'll do my squares. And then if you want to copy the entire list, you can just do the colon. That way it already assumes that you want the beginning of the list and the end of the list. Or you could copy like an actual section of the list. So now that I have, I did that backwards too. All right. So actually my new list is going to be my squares, because I haven't created that yet, and I want my squares to be equal to squares, so that makes more sense. And then I can print my squares just to make sure that we have the same exact list. All right, so now we have the same exact list here, and if we really wanted to make sure that these two lists are different, then we could add something to one of our lists. So what we could do is maybe just like amend something to my squares. So we could append something to my squares, like, I don't know, just add another number, I guess. We can just append another number to our list here. In this case, we appended 3. So we have 3 showing up at the end of this list. And you'll see that it only shows up at this list, not this other one. So, and, just to further clarify that, I guess we can do another print down here of squares. And you can see that it was only added to 1. Now, if we take away this splice that we have here, and we just set it equal to squares, and initiate it to squares, and then we print this, now you'll see that 3 shows up in both of these lists. And that is because we basically just initialize this to the exact list, not a copy of the list. So now both of these lists, my squares and squares, are the same exact list, which you don't want. I mean, if you're trying to copy something, you want to have a separate copy of it. And that is why you want to make sure you use that splice. And like I said before, you could, again, change this to whatever you want if you don't want to have the entire list. And then that way, your my squares will just have the third, fourth, fifth indexes here, which again actually would be um, technically, yeah, index 3 is going to be your fourth number, then fifth, sixth number, and then we still appended the 3 on the end. So yeah, that is basically slicing lists, copying lists, creating lists, different ways of creating lists, and different things you can do with the list. All right, what's up, everybody? So, different shirt, different day. Looks like it's going to take 3 days to round this out. I am going to finish this up real quick. There was only one last thing that I need to touch on, or that the book really touches on in chapter 4, and that is tuples. I think I'm saying that right. T-U-P-L-E. And basically what these are lists that can't be modified. So you create it very similar to how you would create any of these other lists. You just write in whatever your variable name you want, and then instead of using the square brackets, you're going to use just parentheses, and that's going to create your tuple. The difference between these and a list, like I said, you can't modify anything. So if I try to take an index of this tuple and change it to a different number, Python isn't going to let me do that. If I try to build this, it'll give me an error right here that basically just says tuple object does not support item assignment. So you can't change anything once you set it. If you wanted to change anything in there, you would have to basically reassign the entire tuple, meaning you could take your variable and you could just change it and do it that way. And that's basically just going to reassign a different tuple to that variable. So yeah, that is the last thing we're going to cover. I should have just tried to throw that in to my last video, but I wasn't sure how much more of the chapter I had left. It just kind of ran out of time because my daughter woke up. But that's the last thing. So I've gone over pretty much everything you can do with lists and tuples and stuff like that. Hope you guys enjoy this video. On chapter 5 now in this Python crash course book, and chapter 5 is going to be if statements. So my next video will be on if statements. Really enjoying this book. If you guys are enjoying the videos, enjoying learning these things, I would definitely recommend buying this book. I'm leaving a lot of stuff out. So I would definitely recommend buying this book if you guys are enjoying these videos. I'm heavily paraphrasing a lot of stuff in this book, and I'm doing examples that are similar to what they show in the book, but not doing the exact examples that are shown here. And they also have these little try it yourself sections where they kind of give you more not so much examples, but like challenges, like, hey, try to do this yourself and make different things. So definitely worth picking up if you guys are enjoying these videos. I'm enjoying this book. It's a very easy book to read through. I really don't like reading, but this has been actually a lot of fun to go through. It's very simple, easy to read through, easy to follow, and just been a lot of fun. But that's all I got for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did and you made it to the end, thank you very much. Please like the video, subscribe, leave me some comments on what you guys want to see next, or if you guys have any ideas. Yeah, but that's pretty much it. I'll see you next time.